Breana Rouhselang grew up in a place where everyone knew each other's names, where neighbors waved from their porches, and Friday night football games were the highlight of the week. She was the kind of girl people noticed right away. Her energy, her laughter, and the way she seemed to be in 100 places at once made her stand out. Teachers described her as bright and full of potential, while friends admired her ability to juggle school, sports, and friendships without ever appearing to lose her smile. She was a cheerleader who loved the thrill of the sidelines, encouraging her team with unmatched enthusiasm. On the softball field, she was competitive but kind, determined to win yet never cruel to anyone who fell short. To those who knew her, Breana represented the best of what small-town youth could be: hopeful, spirited, and destined for bigger things. But beneath that glowing reputation, Breana carried more than people realized. Like many teenagers, she sometimes felt the weight of expectations pressing down on her. Everyone assumed she was always happy, always strong, but Breana often found herself overwhelmed by the desire to live up to the image others held of her. She had dreams of going further in life, of leaving her town one day to explore opportunities beyond the familiar streets she had always known. Yet she also felt tied to the expectations of family, school, and peers who believed she would always be the same vibrant girl they adored. Her personal life, though carefully hidden, was more complicated than the people around her could imagine. She began to keep secrets, small at first, then larger as time went on. Breana was at an age where emotions felt sharp, where love seemed both exciting and frightening, and where choices often carried consequences that were impossible to fully grasp. She found herself pulled into a relationship that was both intoxicating and confusing, something she didn't feel ready to share openly. The secrecy itself added pressure because she knew the truth would change how others saw her. In the halls of her school, Breana walked with confidence, her head held high as if nothing could touch her. Friends leaned on her for support, younger students looked up to her, and adults admired her drive. Yet when she was alone, moments of doubt crept in. She wondered if she could balance the world's expectations with the reality of her private life. She worried about what would happen if her carefully guarded secrets slipped into the open. To those around her, she remained the golden girl, admired and loved. But like many young people, she was learning that appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the shine of her outward life was a teenager navigating struggles that no one else could see. The stage was set, though no one knew it at the time, for a series of events that would shake the entire town to its core. Breana was a bright star in a small world, but shadows were slowly gathering around her, waiting for the moment when her hidden struggles would collide with her public image in a way no one could have imagined. Breana's world began to shift when she became involved in a relationship that she kept hidden from almost everyone around her. On the surface, it seemed like the kind of story many teenagers experience. Two young people drawn to each other in secret, meeting quietly, sharing moments away from the eyes of teachers, friends, and family. But the reality of their connection was far more complicated. The boy she was involved with was older, a well-known football player who carried his own reputation around the school. To his peers, he was popular, talented, and admired for his performance on the field. To Breana, however, he was someone who offered excitement mixed with unease, a combination that left her unsure of what the relationship really meant. The secrecy of it all added a weight she hadn't expected. Breana knew that if the truth came out, people would talk. Small towns thrive on gossip, and news spreads quickly from one classroom to another, from neighbors to parents, until everyone seems to know the details of a person's private life. She worried about what her friends would think, about how her family might react, and about the reputation she had worked so hard to maintain. The thought of whispers behind her back, of judgment from people she had grown up around, made her even more determined to keep things quiet. But secrecy has a way of tightening its grip, and before long, Breana began to feel trapped in the very silence she thought was protecting her. The relationship itself was far from simple. There were moments when Breana felt cared for, times when the affection seemed genuine, but these were often overshadowed by jealousy and control. Arguments began to creep in, not loud or public, but sharp enough to leave her shaken. She was torn between the excitement of being with someone who seemed to care about her and the fear of what he might do if things didn't go his way. It was a fragile balance, and each day it became harder to maintain. At school, she walked through crowded hallways as though nothing was wrong, offering smiles to her friends and encouragement to her teammates. But in quiet moments, away from the spotlight, the pressure weighed heavily on her. She knew she was living two lives, one where she was the admired student-athlete with a bright future, and another where she was entangled in a relationship that left her constantly on edge. She told herself she could manage both, that she could keep the secret safe, but deep inside she sensed that the truth was already slipping beyond her control. Rumors began to surface, whispered among classmates who noticed things that didn't quite add up. A glance exchanged in the hallway, a conversation that seemed too intense, the way she sometimes looked distracted during practice. All of it fed the curiosity of those around her. In a town where small details become magnified, it was only a matter of time before speculation turned into talk. And with each passing day, Breana felt the walls closing in tighter, as though the very secret she had tried to protect was preparing to unravel in the most devastating way possible. The night of Breana's disappearance began like so many others in her small town, quiet and cold beneath the December sky. Streets were lined with holiday decorations, and families were gathered inside their homes, warming themselves against the winter chill. Breana had told people she was going to a party, something that seemed normal for a girl her age. She had dressed in layers against the frost, carrying the same easy confidence she showed every day. To those who saw her last, there was nothing unusual about her plans. Yet what no one realized at the time was that this night would mark the last time Breana would ever be seen alive. Hours passed, and when Breana failed to return home, concern quickly turned to alarm. Her phone, usually buzzing with messages, fell silent. Calls went unanswered, texts showed no response, and her social media activity suddenly stopped. For a teenager who was always connected, always in touch with friends and family, the silence was chilling. At first, some wondered if she had simply stayed out too late, perhaps deciding to spend the night at a friend's house. But as morning approached and there was still no word from her, those closest to Breana knew something was very wrong. Her family reported her missing, and almost immediately, the community rallied together. Police officers began organizing search parties. Volunteers bundled up in coats and gloves to comb through streets, fields, and wooded areas. Neighbors opened their doors, checking yards, garages, and sheds. Flashlights cut through the darkness as people called her name, hoping desperately that she would appear from the shadows. The fear in the air was palpable, and as hours stretched into a full day, dread began to replace hope. Investigators worked quickly to piece together her last known movements. Friends were interviewed, social media was checked, and surveillance cameras from nearby stores were reviewed. It became clear that Breana had not made it to the party she mentioned. Instead, she had gone to meet someone privately. That revelation only deepened the sense of unease, because it suggested that her disappearance wasn't a simple case of a teenager running away. Something more sinister was at play. As the search widened, whispers spread through town. Some speculated she had gotten into an accident. Others wondered if she had been lured away. The uncertainty was crushing, and the once joyful holiday season turned into days filled with fear and grief. Local news stations covered the story, showing Breana's smiling school photos alongside urgent pleas for information. The sight of her face on television screens and flyers posted around the community made the situation even more real. Behind the scenes, investigators began to focus on the people closest to her. The secret relationship she had tried so hard to keep hidden was coming to light, and with it came troubling questions. Who had she met that night? Why had she kept it a secret? And most importantly, where was she now? With every new detail, the case grew darker, and the hope of finding Breana alive grew fainter. The night that had begun as ordinary was now the center of a nightmare that would shake the community forever. The search for Breana ended with a discovery that shattered her community. In a wooded area on the edge of town, not far from where volunteers had been combing the fields, investigators came across something they hoped never to find. Beneath the cover of trees, hidden from the light of day, lay the lifeless body of the girl who had once been the pride of her school and the joy of her family. The air turned heavy with grief as the reality settled in. Breana had not simply disappeared. She had been taken from the world in the most brutal way. News of the discovery spread quickly, and the small town seemed to stop in its tracks. People gathered in groups, whispering in disbelief, unable to accept that such horror could unfold in a place where life usually felt safe. Schools fell into silence, teachers struggled to steady their voices, and students walked the halls with eyes wide in shock. The girl who had once been a familiar presence in cheer uniforms and softball jerseys was now the subject of hushed conversations and tearful embraces. For investigators, the grim discovery marked the turning point of the case. What had begun as a missing person search was now a homicide investigation. The focus shifted from finding Breana alive to uncovering the truth about who was responsible for her death. They returned to the evidence with renewed determination, sifting through her phone records, retracing her final steps, and questioning those closest to her. Every detail mattered. Every moment of her last day held the possibility of exposing her killer. The secrecy of Breana's private relationship became the center of attention. Detectives pieced together the hidden connection she had kept from most of the world, and the more they uncovered, the more alarming the picture became. It was not simply a romance, but a tangled web of lies, jealousy, and fear. Friends who had suspected something unusual now confirmed their suspicions. They recalled moments when Breana seemed distracted, times when her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and instances when she seemed weighed down by something she couldn't share. The evidence led investigators closer to the truth. The wooded area where she was found suggested careful planning, not a random act of violence. Items left behind, inconsistencies in stories, and the growing mountain of suspicions pointed in one clear direction. The person responsible was not a stranger. It was someone Breana had trusted, someone she had once believed in, and someone who had been close enough to know her secrets. As the town mourned, anger began to mix with grief. People wanted answers, they wanted justice, and they wanted to understand how a girl so full of life could end up the victim of such cruelty. The realization that her death was not the work of chance, but the deliberate act of someone she knew was almost too much to bear. In living rooms, classrooms, and quiet corners of the town, the same question echoed again and again. How could love twist so far into something so unthinkably dark? The truth behind Breana's death was revealed piece by piece, each detail more disturbing than the last. Investigators discovered that her secret boyfriend had been growing increasingly desperate in the days leading up to her disappearance. He feared that the relationship would be exposed, and with it, the consequences he wasn't willing to face. What began as fear turned quickly into anger, and anger hardened into a terrible decision. Instead of confronting the truth, he chose to silence Breana forever. It was a choice that would not only destroy her life, but also unravel his own. The courtroom became the stage where the full story was finally told. Reporters filled the benches, family members clutched tissues, and the community gathered to witness justice. Evidence was laid out with painstaking detail, the digital trail of messages, the inconsistencies in his statements, and the chilling timeline that matched his movements to Breana's final hours. Each revelation felt like a knife twisting deeper into the hearts of those who loved her. The person who should have cared for her had instead become her killer, betraying not only Breana, but the entire community that had once looked up to him as a promising young athlete. During the trial, the prosecution painted a picture of control, manipulation, and cold calculation. They described how he had lured Breana away under the pretense of talking, how he had taken her to a secluded area, and how the meeting had ended in violence. The defense attempted to argue panic, claiming he acted in the heat of the moment, but the evidence told a different story. This was not an accident or a sudden lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate act, carried out to ensure that Breana could never reveal their secret. The verdict, when it came, brought a mixture of relief and sorrow. Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom, offering justice, but never the closure her family truly longed for. Tears flowed freely as the reality sank in. Breana's life had been stolen, her dreams extinguished, her future erased. No sentence could restore what was lost, no punishment could erase the pain left behind. The town that once celebrated its young athletes and cheered for its students now carried the weight of a tragedy that would never be forgotten. In the months that followed, Breana's story became more than a local crime. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly love can be poisoned by lies, secrecy, and fear. Vigils were held in her memory, candles lit against the night sky as her classmates and neighbors promised never to forget her. Her name became a symbol of both innocence lost and the need for awareness about the dangers that can hide behind closed doors. Even years later, the case continues to haunt those who knew her. Her story is retold in classrooms, whispered among friends, and shared in documentaries as a reminder of the fragility of trust. Breana was a girl full of promise, a light in her community, and though her life ended in tragedy, her memory endures as both a warning and a call to protect those whose struggles remain unseen.